Yeah, no, 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 no. Yeah, no, 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 no. Yeah, no, 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 no. Yeah, no, 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 no. Melanated minds with the crown restored. Asiatic truth that we cannot ignore. Honor to noble Drew Ali, we rise. Nationality reclaimed, open your eyes. Love, truth, peace, freedom, justice, the spark. No more strangers walking in the dark. Research first, let the facts ignite. Real Moorish talk every week, truth over hype. This is knowledge, this is heritage, this is consciousness. Welcome to Real Moorish Talk with your hostess, Prime Minister Durriyyah. Hey. Yeah, no, 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 no. Yeah, no, 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 no. Shadow hour. 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 You are now tuned into Real Moorish Talk. Melanated glow, crown back on the throne. Asiatic spirit, yes, we finally home. Honor noble Drew Ali, we proclaim. Nationality restored, we reclaim the name. Yeah, yeah. Love, truth, peace, let it spark that fire. Freedom, justice, lifting hearts higher. No more strangers, we know our part. Real Moorish Talk, truth from the heart. Real Moorish Talk, truth from the heart. Real Moorish Talk, that's right. Yeah, na, 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 na. Shadow hour. Yeah, na, 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 na. Shadow hour. Yeah, na, 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 na. Shadow hour. Yeah, na, 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 na. That's it. That's it, rise up. This is heritage. That's it, rise up. This is consciousness. That's it, rise up. That's your heritage. That's it, rise up. Never haven't been. That's it, rise up. This is heritage. This is consciousness with your hostess, Prime Minister Durriyyah.
All right, all right. Welcome to Real Morse Talk. Welcome to Shadow Hour. I am your hostess, Prime Minister, National Grand Sheikah Durriyyah Bay, and I'm so excited to be with you all today. But first and always, I want to first rise and give praises to the Almighty Creator, whom I choose to call Allah, for allowing me to wake up this rising in my right frame of mind with my good common sense, life, health, and consciousness, with the ability to stay on this road, the Islamic road, the conscious road, the smooth road, because you know what? Sometimes it's rough and sometimes it's smooth. So I just want to thank you all for being here today with me. And we're going to get right into the topic. So, the prior weeks, we were talking about health and nutrition. And I even did a cooking segment, and I really wanted more of you all to tune in and join me in that cooking section because culturally, our health has a lot to do with who we are and the way we eat our foods and the things too. And so I wanted to connect that also. So we did the live in the kitchen, and just thank you all for those who joined me, and some of you all for the ones that actually did the recipe. So thank you. Some of you all said you really did enjoy the curry chickpea and corn muffins. Some people said they never made corn muffins that way before. My son called them my famous corn muffins, but they're good and nutritious. It didn't hurt to put a nutritious twist on the corn muffins. So thank you all for tuning in. And actually, the people that I was making the extra pot for, they just loved it. They were saying it wasn't too spicy, it was just right. So, listen, any other time you all would like for me to do a cooking segment, even though our numbers were not high, I will gladly do that because it's important to me. It's about the information, and then, eventually over time, the numbers will grow. A lot of people not to seem to be really interested in eating healthy and being healthy. But listen, as much as we want to fight for who we are and fight for our right to be who we have to be healthy to do that. And so we have to look at our bodies as our temples. We have to take care of these bodies. And we have to look at that, learning how to eat better, will make a big difference in our lives. And when we know better, we do what we do better. So I just wanted to get that out of the way and thank everyone who did participate, those who did share the video, and those who made comments about how well they enjoyed the food. And some of you all ordered the cookbook as well. So thank you for that because it's really important. A lot of times people say, well, I've got this cookbook or you showed me how to make this and it didn't come out exactly the same. And the one thing I will tell people is that if you, first of all, we have to do things in love, right? So when I'm in the kitchen, you have to be in your right frame of mind in the kitchen. I'm always cooking, but if you're going to put on a cooking show, you have to make sure that you're telling people every little thing. And see, I'm very authentic. Like I want you to know every blooper I made, every little change I do, because that makes a big difference in the recipe. So if you come to my house and you're eating what I cook, and then I'm on air and I'm doing it, but I don't tell you that I put a little bit more salt here or a little bit more pepper here or anything like that. If I don't tell you that, then your food is not going to taste exactly the same. And I do let people know also that if you don't want as much spice or you don't want to use this, or if you cannot, some people are allergic to nuts. So if you cannot use coconut oil, you can use olive oil or grapeseed oil. So it may make a difference in the change in the muffin, but it will still be a good moist muffin, right? So that's the thing. So sometimes you have to make changes according to what you have in your kitchen or according to what you're allergic to. I'm not allergic to any nuts. Thank goodness. I love nuts. I don't have any nut allergies, but I know that my youngest daughter does. And so when I make corn muffins for her, I cannot even put flaxseed in it because she cannot do seeds or nuts. And so I usually make her corn muffins differently than I would make. I would use vegan butter in hers instead. So if you have nut allergies or seed allergies, those are some of the changes you would make. And if you need to know any changes, if you're not really sure, just hit me at realmoretalk@yahoo.com. All right. And I will be glad to help you with any changes that you may need with that. So I really look forward to you all pushing that video though. And the one thing is we want to keep our numbers up. And so I know some of you all are very short tempered. We're in an age where people are more of a TikTok. like after the first 15 seconds or something, you lose interest. I'm from the old school. We take our time and we do things. And so, trustfully, some of you all younger people will learn to have a little bit more patience, right? And learn how to do things too, because it's really important to take your time and do things. And I think learning to cook in the kitchen is a really good one. So I trust that I did good by you all. My granddaughter, Janiyah was the inspiration behind all that. So, Janiyah, love you to life. Thank you so much for that. But we're going to move on right to our next segment that we're doing. And it's really, really important that we keep up with these things. So I want to say congratulations to me. Congratulations to you all. We're on episode 15. Yes, of Real More Talk. So we're at episode 15. I'm excited about that today as well. And what I wanted to go over today was a few things that we've been talking about in the past. The Prophet Noble Drawley is a big inspiration for this whole broadcast because he's the prophet that no one wants to talk about. But, as far as Prophet Noble Drawley is concerned, he taught the Moors everything he thought we needed to know to be successful. And not just in the founder's form, but in the reincarnated form under John Gibbons Ill. He taught us how to eat, how to cook, how to dress, all the science behind the white, wearing the white, and all those things. So one did not complete, the other one tried to complete. And then we had many successors after the reincarnated prophet. We had Richardson Dingo Ill, who really followed the reincarnated prophet himself. Some say he called himself the third, reincarnated the third. I didn't know him by that. I knew him by Richardson Dingo Ill. And then we have our Timothy Dingo Ill, who also went back to the more type Morisco type environment where he did more churchy type preaching, like from the Bible, things like that, took people back to flesh eating and things like that. So everyone had their catch on what they did doing according to their comprehension or understanding. But for me, the most important teachings came from the founder and then under the reincarnated prophet John Gibbons Ill. I love that he put together the Young Men's League, the Sisters Auxiliary. He put together the grocery stores, the schooling. That's how we have our online schooling for Moorish children. Because Prophet Noble Drawley in the reincarnated form did do the first school in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So, we have a lot of legacy, a lot of history that we have behind us. But with the information that was given to us, we have to know how to discern it to the public and also try to keep people interested and engaged. I was having this conversation this week where a lot of people lose interest in more science because when they first come into the movement, they want to know, what can this movement do for me? And listen, I do not disagree with, El Malik El Shabazz said that before you join any organization, you should first know what it's all about, right? So a lot of people want to know, can I not pay taxes? Can I not pay mortgage? Can I not pay for a car? Can I not? That's all you hear. So they're not really interested in the root information of the organization and what this organization was dedicated to. It's more of, what can this organization do for me? And then if I'm not happy or satisfied, then I'll leave the organization and talk about it and say how horrible this organization is. And so that's what happens a lot when people are not happy or satisfied. That means they're not here for the reasons that the organization was established. And that was for the uplifting of fallen humanity. It was to bring us back into the constitutional fold of government, to bring us back into the consciousness. And why am I going over this? Because some of the information that I'm going to talk about today truly affects that. Really, it does. And also, we lost one of our instructors, so I want to give a few moments of silence to Sister Kadira Ali. And she's Kadira Ali Ill, some Kadira Ali. I want to give a lot of information to her because Sister Kadira was one of our instructors who lived in Alabama, and she came across us off of a YouTube from Tariq. Everyone knows Taj. And so she tried practicing more science in her territory, but her family is like really Christian, stoned down, stumped down, Southern Christian, the swine eating, flesh eating, blonde hair, blue eyed Jesus type Christians. And so she was having a really hard time striving to live a Moorish life and also live there. So I want to give much honor to her for her battle, her strength. we lost her, this week. And, she was a really, really, really pivotal part of our school system. She was our healthcare and PE instructor. And a lot of the students are grieving, hard from that loss, because we have to learn about grief. We have to teach our people about grief, about death, because we all don't have a really great understanding of death. We just don't. We know that death is not an enemy, that's a friend. We're told that, right? And so we try to practice that. But the physical part, this is what's gone. The physical part of this is gone. And so we're going to miss that physical part. And also her voice, that vocal tone that Sister Kadira had. We're going to miss that. And also on the 5th, she passed on the 4th. On the 5th, it made 5 years ago that I lost my father, one of my legacies also, that I lost my father 5 years ago on the 5th. And so we know that those physical forms, enjoy the physical while you're here. This is why we're talking about health and nutrition on our programs too. Enjoy it while you're here. Take care of the flesh. Tell the people that's here that you love them. Let them know that you care about them. Do not mistreat people or take people for granted. Show some love, encouraging, and character to people, because you never know when this flesh is going to depart. And once it's gone, there's no coming back. All right. Even though that people believe that Lazarus was brought back to life, we know that that's an untruth too. But the bottom line is that we have to make sure that we're taking care of each other. Okay. That's why I always end with every show, take care of yourselves and each other. All right. So I just wanted to give a shout out to all of us and the ones in our school who are listening. Sister Kadira, we love you to life, sister. We really do. And now that you're gone from us, we will always remember you. We will always celebrate you. You were a very, very important part of our school. So much honor to Sister Kadira Ali. Yeah. Much, much honor to you, sister. All right. And so I want to really quickly, it says, greetings, Prime Minister. Sister BJL, greetings to you also, Sister Islam. D Bay, Islam, Arba, Islam. Somebody Arba, it says it's Arn, is it Army by more spice is nice. Okay. All right. So do you know German? Do you know Dr. German Arbe? Absolutely. I know about Dr. German Arbe. Because I did not mention his name, I apologize. I just mentioned some of the people, but I do know about Arbe. I know about Arbe. I know about a lot of the Moors that were here, and those that did the work. So yes, shukran for that. Islam Moorish Family Peace and 42 Prime Minister National Grand Sheikh Durriyyah Bey. That would be from Sheikh Bilal Amin Bey. All right. So now let's get into our subject matter for today. So stick with me. And if you have paper and pencil, please take it out like we always do for this particular Real Moorish Talk, episode 15. I'm so excited about it. So tonight we'll be asking, were you given an identity or were you assigned a label? Because there is a difference. And if you do not understand that difference, you will continue to operate inside of a system that was never created for your benefit. Okay, that's the whole thing about identity and labels, is that we have to make sure that we know the identification, what the difference between identity and labels are. Okay. And so a label is something that's assigned to you. And we know that that's what with those Negro labels, and the Prophet said those labels that were put upon you. We know those are labels that was assigned to us. We're going to talk about tonight and why they were assigned to us. All right. And identity is something that's in root. So we know that identification comes from your heritage, right? From your legacy, from the people that you were birthed from, right? Your mother, father, sister, brothers, all of us have identities. But when you're told you do not have an identity, when it's taken away from you and a label is put in its place, then you start taking on the assignment of the label. And it's called label switching. Listen, they switch the labels back and forth. And we're going to go over that today too. Some of the labels that were switched back and forth. All right. Okay. Labels can change based on systems, but identity is tied to heritage, culture, and lineage. Okay. All right. So let's begin with the timeline that I have. So I did some timelines of when a label switching and identity started coming on board. So that's what I did. I like to do timelines. I really enjoy timelines because it gives us a sense of when something took place. See, I got some extra lighting in here. I want to get rid of that extra light. I'm not sure what that is from the camera setup. But anyway, all right, so let me continue on. So let's begin with this timeline. In 1735, a European naturalist named Carl Linnaeus, published a work titled System Natura, is what it was called, System Natura. And in this text, he introduced one of the earliest structured classifications of human beings. He divided humanity into four categories. Homo Europeanus, he is white people. Homo Americans Rubensons as red Americans. Homo Asiaticus, from Asia, he brown, tawny, and Asian. And Homo Africanus, nigger, black African. So those were the four that he did, and that was in 1735. Now pay attention to this timeline. This is 1735, before modern genetics, before modern anthropology. This was classification based on primarily on appearance. So he was the very first one to try to take the appearance that you are, the way you looked, and he tried to identify it into the classification. Now, according to, when he did that, it wasn't that he was trying to be any malice or anything like that. He was strictly trying to identify people as human beings according to what they say. We know that all these Europeans always try to make it where they make themselves superior and make us inferior. We know that. That's just an automatic. And if it's something that you do not know by now, then you should know it now, today. Okay. All right. So now in 1758, Linnaeus released the 10th edition of Systemata Naturae. This was where things changed. He did not just describe physical traits, he began assigning behavioral characters to each group. So now color became connected to character. And once the connection is made, it begins to influence perceptions across society. So once he introduced this, and back during a lot of those times, they looked at their European scientists as an all, know all, geniuses or whatever, and they were just playing around with things. But a lot of times back then, whatever was said, and they knew it, whatever they said or put out there, that's what wound up being carried over. Okay, so moving forward in the timeline, in the 1790s, we see the work of Johann. His name is Johann Frederick Blumenbach. A lot of you all probably do know about him. Probably didn't know about the first man, but you knew about Blumenbach. He introduced a 5-part classification system. So he decided to do 5 parts versus, remember we have 4. Now we're moving to 5, and this is in 1790. He introduced Caucasian, Mongolian, Ethiopian, American, and Malayo. And now this is when another shift began. From geographic to physical appearance. Now this is important because now he was trying to go geographically and try to put the appearance of people with a location of the people, with a location. Because once classification is based on appearance, it becomes easier to generalize and control the people. So, have you ever researched when the labels you come from? Have you ever did the research like where the labels African American came from? Because a lot of our people are still stuck on wanting to be African American. A lot of more of them are stuck on wanting to be black. Not African Americans, they want to be black, and this is another label, but they're really stuck on these labels. And so what I'm trying to do is help people research that the labels you're stuck on is not a means of classification. It's not a means of identity. It's simply that a label. Okay. All right. And so you can answer it if you ever did any research. You can just answer it in the chat if you ever did do any research on it. And so, all right. So during the mid to late 1700s, philosophy began reinforcing these ideals. So David Hume, 1711 to 1776, and Immanuel Kant from 1724 to 1804 made statements associating light skin with superiority and dark skin with inferiority. As I said earlier, these ideals did not remain. They were used to support real world systems. So the transatlantic slave trade that they claimed to happen between 1500s and 1800s. Then you had chattel slavery in the Americas and colonial expansion. Okay, and so now we have classification, interpretation, justification systems. That's what we had. It was considered classification, interpretation, and justification systems. Okay, so by the late 1600s into the 1700s, a hierarchy had began. Light colors on the top and dark colors at the bottom. This was not accidental. Okay, this was reinforced through law. People used the law to do it. They used religion, education, and economy to try to do the light, dark. Light is better, dark is inferior. And they also, a lot of us got into that classification system with the brown paper bag and all that. And we're going to get into all of that. Okay. And so now we move into the language. In 1797, in French colonies such as Saint Domingo, the term Gen Z color, people of color, was used. Now it's funny because I wanted to make sure I got this because people are using people of color today. Now remember, it's nothing new under the sun. These Europeans use the same things over and over again. So instead of saying colored people back then, it was people of color. Now notice the timeline. I said 1797. We're in the 2000s now, 2016, and now people of color is becoming a really big term. But people of color never included Asiatics. It never included us. What people in color at that particular time, what it was including was people who were considered mixed. It was not even a dark olive Asiatics or anything like that. They were calling people of color people who were mixed. So your people who were, not considered 100% Asiatics, but back during that time, if you had just one drop of, Asiatic blood, they considered the one drop rule that you were considered Asiatic. So the people that were all mixed, they call them mistivas and all of these different terms that they use for people who were mixed at the time. They decided to call them people of color. Notice I didn't say colored people because remember, colored people was identifying more to the darker olive melanated Asiatics, and people of color was considered your lighter complected people who were mixed heritage. Okay. And so this begins to shift over time because people were applying different labels to different people at this particular time. So now from the 1600s to the 1700s and to the 1800s, we have a system that was built classified by color, attached meaning to color, creating hierarchy and reinforced it through institutions. And that was your learning institutions. This was your jobs, all of this. Now, all of these people were introducing this hierarchy now. So it became, if you were lighter, the lighter you were, the brighter you were, the easier it was. You got jobs and things like that. And so where you were dark olive Asiatic, you may have gotten a job working. If you were dark olive Asiatic, then some of the things that you were out in the field, and then the lighter Asiatics were the ones that were in the kitchen, in the house, or whatever. That's what that was considered. All right. And so we know that the labels were put on us. And one of the things about labels is that when people start labeling you, then you start taking on that identity, right? People start believing that's who they are. By labels, they start taking on the identity of the labels. And that's what people start doing. And then after that, then it becomes a whole system, right? So this was became systematic. So now we know that for us, our people, a lot of times they had what they, I meant to bring a brown paper bag up here, but I can use this sort of like a brown paper bag, right? So one of the things that people started doing, if you were darker than a brown paper bag, right, you are not accepted into society. That's one of the things that they did. If you were, darker than a brown paper bag, and I have to, like, even boxers today are sort of brown paper bag method. But if you were darker than that, then you consider too dark for jobs, society, and even Asiatics started doing the same thing to our own people. So you were considered an outcast, lower class, unintelligent, all of these things if you were darker, right? And these were labels that we even put on ourselves because what the European psychology we are putting onto ourselves that anybody that was darker than a brown paper bag was considered inferior, unintelligent, right? These are some labels that we put on ourselves. And so that's why I wanted to go, are you a label or are you identification? Because the bottom line is when you are labeled, when you are put in as a label, then that it sticks with you. And labels can change though, right? Because we know we went from Negro to black to colored. So we went from colored to black, from colored to Negro to black, back to colored, back to black. Now we're African Americans and now people of color. So look at the different label changes that happened during that time. Okay. All right. And so I just wanted to make sure I clear all my notes. And so we know that the European took on identification as white. And it's a video out, and I might mention it before, where a European woman talks about when people became white. And she's talking about the time frame and when people start identifying themselves as white people, because they were not considered white in the beginning. We make it like the Europeans were always called white. We make it like that's what it was. They were always called white and we keep them white and all of that. And that's an untruth. The Europeans were called who they were, and they really distinctly went by their nationality. So if they were German, Russian, Italian, whatever, they told you who they were. They did not go to identify themselves as being white. White came in as a classification, which is we know as a label, just like black came in as a classification. So you had these scientists that first tried labeling us, and we know that Blumenbach's ones was the most successful one because they started having the red man was the Indian, the yellow man was the Chinese or Japanese people, right? The brown man was anyone from Asian descent. At the time, they didn't even have the Puerto Ricans and something in there. Then they had the black people were considered us. So let me see, did I get all of them? And the white people, yes, were the European. And those were his 5 classifications. So we know that his was the most successful classification. Then they started doing our nose, our lips, our hair. So they started genetically saying if your nose was really big, you were considered, if you were less smaller nose, they start going to character traits, your dark hair, your dark eyes, your kinky hair, all these things. People started identifying you. So now you weren't even considered human. You were considered a classification. Not that they even considered you human in the beginning, but now we got your classification breakdown. So they're making everyone into classification. And today, still today, we're doing the same thing, classifications. So now we went into classifications based on appearance. And like I said, the 5-part system at that particular time. And then now, let me just make sure I cover all my notes. And now so now we had the light skin superiority, the dark skin inferiority, like I said. And then we had the expansion from the slavery. So now that you're put into your mind frame, and this is what the prophet talked about, the labels in your mind frame, that you're considered this individual, you're considered, now you're ignorant. That's what they considering you as, ignorant, which means the word ignorant means not knowing. So of course you're not knowing who you are identification wise, because now what they do is wait generations of generations, and then they move the children around. So now you can't identify with who you are, which we've talked about that before on this particular broadcast. And so now, even in slavery, what they call captive in our own land, where people literally separated themselves. So the light complected slaves were in the house and not in the field, and the dark complected slaves were in the field, right? So we worked harder than the ones in the house, and the house, they kept us separated. So the people from the house could not associate with the people on the land, and they thought they were better. These are labels that they put on us to keep separating us, and they're still using the same labels to separate us today. And I know a lot of times people feel like because they're lighter complected, they feel like they're better, because that stigma is still sticking with them today. And they don't really realize. So you'll hear people say a light-skinned black man or a light-skinned black woman. And they're listen to that definition. You're saying you have light skin, but you're black. That should tell you that that's a classification. That is not accepted. That's two adjectives trying to describe an individual now, a noun, right? So you know that if they're talking about your light-skinned black man or whatever, they have to be talking about your complexion is light, but your classification in society is degrading, that is lower. That is what they're saying. So a lot of our people think they're saying, "Oh, you're light-skinned black person, so you're light-skinned, but you're black," and then they have no idea that they're talking about identification of class, identification of people. And so this is how you keep getting thrown off. So you have to ask yourself, am I a label or am I identification? You have to ask yourself that. And I wanted to go to, there was an article in, I never forget this article. I had this article and I kept this with me and I use it as a teaching reference. It was in the Source Ebony 23 November 1967. And it was What is in a Name? And it was versus at this time it was the Negro versus the African American versus Black. So that's what it was, the Negro versus the Afro American versus Black. And what the discussion was is, which one are you? Again, label identification. Which one are you? Like, which one does you identify with the most? Right. And so we know that none of these would identify us. But now, and I'm telling you, this was back in 1967 that this article came out. And what it was says is, when I use a word Humpty Dumpty said in a rather scornful tone, it means just that I chose it to mean neither more nor less. This question is said, Alice, whether you can make words mean so many different things. The question is, said Humpty Dumpty, which is to be the master, that's all. And remember the title, Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall, Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. It took all the king horses and all the king's men to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. And it's funny because as old as I am, you're taught that in school, and I recall that. You're taught that in school, and I recall that, the Humpty Dumpty line. So when you're saying that, and a lot of times when I was younger, my uncle used to say they're talking about the Moors on the Humpty Dumpty whole thing. Fell off the wall. Humpty Dumpty just lost himself. And he fell so low that it took all the king horses and all the king men to try to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. So that is what that is. So it says, more concretely, within the context of the racial looking glass, the question is whether one can make the word Negro mean so many different things, or whether one should abandon it and use the words Asiatic, use the words Black, Asiatic, or Afro-American. And I had, in one of the books that I have wrote, Why Am I Moorish American? I have this information in that book about which one should you use in classification. And we know that Asiatic would be our classification, as that is our natural origin of birth. So we know that. But then the Afro-American came on board because, people were wearing what they considered the hairstyle and Afro. And so they wanted to identify the people with a hairstyle, which you can't identify people with a hairstyle. That's just totally ridiculous. or if you wanted to consider them just African, or today would be African American. So we know that El Malik El Shabazz, formerly known as Malcolm X, left the whole so-called Negro word and colored word and started calling himself an Afro-American, because at that particular time, that's the knowledge that he knew. Like, that's where he was knowledge base wise. But we know today that the term African American is still another label. It's not something that identifies you as an individual. And because these scientists back then started this whole classification from 4 to 5, now we still put ourselves into classification versus identification. We give ourselves labels versus identity. And that's some of the things that I really want us to go over, because in this article was I wanted to share this article with you because this article was very, very interesting for me. And I found this article in the 80s at some point. So it was done in 1967, but I didn't find this until the 80s. Okay. This controversy, which rages with religious intensity from the street corners of Harlem to the campus of Southern colleges, has alienated old friends, split national organizations apart, and disrupted national conventions. It was discussed with gravity at a meeting of the National Advisory Commission of Civil Disorders, and is a matter of grave concern to prominent Negro leaders at that time who have been heckled and publicly denounced for using the word Negro. And so that's what was happening back then. They were fighting about using the word Negro, using the word colored, using the word Afro-American, using the word Asiatic. They were fighting on what words should they use at this particular time. Within that last year, several organizations had gone on record in opposition of continuing to use the words. At the Racism and Education Conference of the American Federation of Teachers, the delegates unanimously endorsed a resolution which called all educators, individuals, and organizations to abandon the slavery-imposed name Negro. So they had this great big conference to get rid of Negro. Now, let's keep in mind, for those of us who are conscious, that Negro and Black mean the same exact thing. But because we don't realize it's Black in another language, we think that we're elevating ourselves from the word Negro to the word Black. Okay. So they wanted them to turn the word from Negro to Black to African American or Afro American. A similar resolution was unanimously adopted at the National Conference of Asiatic Power. But the Asiatic Power Conference compounded the Negro by insisting upon the substitution of the word Black for Negro. Same thing. It means the same exact thing. There was additional ferment during at this time period, with militant groups passed a variety of pro-Black and pro-Afro-American resolutions and peppered newspapers and magazines with anger and, in some cases, abusive letters. Some pro-Negro advocates charged indignantly that the whole Black issue was raised by a handful of intellects, none of them who were Asiatic. None of them were Asiatic, except for their beards. But it was obviously that the controversy touched deep emotions in the Black community, where many segments, particularly the young, were engaged agonizing search for self-identity, self-determination, and self-responsibility. And so back then you can see where the fight still with the labels are. Now, of course, I updated the language to Asiatic, but back then they were saying that they were fighting over the term of using Black, not realizing that the term Black was still the same label. It's still the same label, no matter how you put it. But they had a whole conference. This is what I'm telling you, how messed up our people are from the labels. Remember, I told you that this label started back in probably the 1500s, but by the time they got to 1700s, you had two European scientists, the one with his 4 classifications. So I want to remind you, and for those who just came on board, So if we went from 4 classifications to 5 classifications, and that's where we definitely have to make sure that we're teaching our children the difference, because some of our children today, even children that are Moorish descent, they want to still be black. They want to identify as that. They don't see anything wrong with it. They think that conversation wise is better to connect, during this conversation, because they're afraid to saying what Asiatic, because a lot of times people are telling them that Asiatic identifies with the people who they claim from Asia today, and that's not truthful. But because they do not have the correct teachings, and this is something that in every Asiatic school it should be being taught, but because these schools are set up on government funds and foundations, they'll never be able to tell the truth to the students or the people, because as long as you're accepting government funding, you're never going to be able to tell the truth to the people. You're never going to be able to tell them who they are. Even the so-called people that know who they are. Sheep out, I was watching let me see, Dr. Clark, right? I have not a lot of respect for Dr. Clark. But anyway, a lot of things he would be saying about who Asiatics are. When Dr. Clark would be talking about Asiatics, he still used the term black, right? And African American, but they will call the Europeans, but they will not call us Asiatics or who we are. They'll still keep calling us black. But anyway, we were watching this episode of Dr. Clark's show where that Farrakhan at one time tried to say the people with kinky hair and dark complexions were cursed. That originally, according to Elijah Muhammad, he was saying we had straight hair, straight like our eyebrows and our eyelashes, and now our hair is now kinky. And this is because of some disturbance, and this is the reason why we were mistreated because of that. Now we know Farrakhan is, mixed heritage, and we know that he's light complected with that straight, slicky hair or whatever. So for him to come out of his mouth and say that, which is no scientific proof, and that's what Dr. Clark was talking about, and I agree with him on that episode, that he was calling us, saying that we were cursed, according to the Bible, the Piscean record that you all call the Bible, that we were cursed. And so you can see how these labels even affected people as far as Farrakhan is concerned. Now, why Farrakhan would think that we had straight hair at one time when other nationalities of Asiatics do have straighter hair, but we have the natural kinky hair, and our hair is a protectionist coil for a purpose, because he had no scientific proof. And this is what labels do to people, and it makes people take on identification that they should not even try to take on. But we know as you grow in knowledge that that there's different Asiatics and different Asiatics from different tribes, according to the tribe, according to how close they are to the actual equator, to closer to the sun, how it actually has us develop with more melanin in our skin, more naturally curly hair. Our hair is more naturally kinky, not straight. Straight hair is not a natural hair for us. It's our coiled hair, and the coils in our hair, which I have a book. Your hair is your conscious. My hair is my conscious connected to the universe, and you should get that book, because I talk about the chakras and then the hair and the signals, the antennas that our hair transmits. And so that's one of the reasons why we know how dangerous labels are to identity. So even someone who's a speaker like Farrakhan, which we've known him to be controversial over the years, people will want to cut you about Farrakhan. But anytime he can identify with a European German being his God, then that his thoughts are not on kinky hair and dark complexion. All right. And so the indoctrination of our people with label switching and taking away identity versus labels is one of the problems that we're having today. And that's why we're speaking about this, because it's really important that we identify ourselves to who we are and stay connected with our identification. And listen, stop trying to be something that you are not. That's the whole purpose. The prophet said, be yourself and not somebody else. All these things were told to us for a reason. Okay. So I wanted to just get into this, how the battle and fight over all these years is still a fight about who we are. And some of us just don't really realize that we're making things worse for ourselves than we could ever make it by not identifying with yourself. Okay, so at this particular, it was a lot of Asiatics, prominent, what they consider prominent Asiatics at this particular meeting. So we want to talk about. So Asiatic professionals gave the movement the edge that isolated nationalism, working alone, had never been able to forge, and it was response to the growing edge of Asiatic organizations, and it was in response to the growing edge. Asiatic professionals changed their letterheads to indicate the new vision they have for themselves in relation to African and America. The Negro Teachers Association of New York City, for example, became the African American Teachers Association. So you see how switching these labels was really important to them. They wanted to get away from the whole Negro identity. And they realized, some of them probably realized that Black was the same identity. So they wanted to go to the African American versus the Black. Okay. And in New York Amsterdam News, one of the largest Asiatic newspapers announced that it would no longer use the word Negro. The newspaper, which now identifies Americans of African descent to Afro Americans, reported as favorable response to the change. Dick Edwards, the assistant manager editor, says letters are running 9-1 in the favor of Afro American, the word. He says, because we are descendants of Africans and because we are born in America. So they knew we were descendants of African. That's the prophet said, we're descendants of Africans. Remember, Africa is still a new word, as I've already taught you all, right? But they realized that they were descendants of Africans and born in America. And so this fight to get away from the Negro and the Black back in the 1960s. Like I introduced, this was in 1967 in the Ebony. This was in 1967. He also urged that there's a cringing word is a cringing from the word Negro, and that young people were not even associated with that because the oppression into which we are born, and because the name was imposed on us. There seems to be violent objection to the term among young people who think the word Negro, who associate the word Negro with Uncle Tom. They seldom use the word Negro. They use the term Asiatic and African. Some of them even object to the word Afro American, referring for the term Afram. Is this the real game? Is it real? Will it last? And there's substantial grounds for violent opposition for the word Negro. And I remember those times because when I was in school, like I was saying, I remember the people would cut you. You know, you didn't call them a Negro, you called them Black, they would cut you. You know, right? Because people were getting into that term. They wanted to be associated with their landmass, their homeland. So people were waking up somewhat back then. And you have to think about, the prophet came here in 1913. Well, he said it came in 1912. Before that, we know he came in way before that, but he was here since 1907, I believe. But anyway, he started setting up the organization in 1912. And by 1913, he opened up the first temple. So we know that people had some wisdom of what the prophet was saying. But because they didn't want to associate themselves with being Moorish or being Asiatic, they rather had the term African because it related them back to some identity, some landmass, some association with who they were. And so this is why people really took on that term African American. And I cannot blame them. Probably if I wasn't brought up with knowing who I was, I probably would have wandered more to the African American than I would have to the Black, because I would want to associate myself with the landmass. Even though we know that there's over 53 nations in Africa, I would want to know what nation in Africa do I associate myself with. And I remember a sister told me that I belong to the Philelian tribe. She was telling me that my skin tone and my look, the way I look, my features, I would belong to the Philelian tribe if I was living over there in those continents. So some of the Philelian tribe wind up being put, I guess, into slavery. And so those would be people that I look like, even though we know all of them are Moors. But we know for a self-identification of tribes, they told me that's what I look like. So I would be part of the Fidelian tribe. And listen, I did some research on them, and some of them sisters, I can barely tell that they not my actual bloodline. Like, I mean, their bloodline, but I'm saying, my mother didn't have those children and my father, but we look so much alike. So I was very excited to see, because we have the smaller nose, smaller lips, and things like that, from that particular tribe. And so different tribes have different characteristics. And so I could see why people was fighting back then in the 1960s to try to get rid of the term Negro and Black, because they wanted to associate more with their landmass. And so I was excited to share this information with you all, because this fight is not new. This fight, the prophet brought it back in the 1913s all the way to the 1920s is when it was most popular, all the way down to the 1960s. So we have to ask ourselves, when did it become unpopular at that time? And when did we want to switch over and become back to colored people and people of color? When did this happen? Because all of a sudden we have a switch. But remember, I said earlier that label switching, you can change a label at any time. It's like a garment. And I'll share, when I used to work in the corporate world, and yes, I used to work in the corporate world as a corporate nurse, and I would be going to a lot of meetings. I used to do menu plans, etc., for the corporations. And anyway, I'll never forget, I had this suit. I will never forget this suit. And my oldest daughter had picked this suit out for me, and they used to like to buy me clothes. But anyway, I had a beautiful suit on. It was a natural tone suit, very fit very, very well, very, very, very professional looking suit. So I went to this particular corporation meeting. And when I was at the meeting, the woman at the meeting, another woman, had on the same exact suit. Same exact suit. And so I was like, oh, so she looked and she said, oh, she said, I believe she asked me if it was because my suit was a Liz Claiborne. And so I think she was saying, I cannot remember what designer she asked, but I know my daughter used to love buying Liz Claiborne for me back then. Liz Claiborne was one of the clothes that we bought back then, learning how to wear clothes and things like that. And she said, whatever name. And I said, no, not the same suit, a same looking suit, but not the same label. No, I believe mine is a Liz Claiborne. My daughter is really big on Liz Claiborne. And so she was like, are you sure? And so she opened up her suit, and in the line of the suit had her label. I think it was, trying to think of that woman, Karen. Is it Karen something? Anyway, so she did. And so I opened up my suit, and on the bottom of my suit in the back had the label. And we both bust out laughing. And I said, label switching, because that's what a lot of companies do. They switch labels. You have the same exact clothing, but they'll change the label in the clothing to mark up the price. It could be the same exact manufacturer coming off the line. They switch the labels. The same thing for us. We're the same people, but they're switching the labels. So they might call you, Black. They might call you color, might call somebody African American, Afro American, might call some people colored people, people of color. They do the switching of the labels. And so that's called label switching. And so that's the world that we're living in. So they constantly switching our labels back and forth. And I will never forget, one year the census came to my door, and they were handing out this census. And so I was talking to the woman about the census and all that. And so on the actual application, it had on there, it had African Americans, Black, colored, and Negro on the census documentation. It's about 10 years ago. So I asked the woman, I said, why do we have the term colored and Negro back on this census application? And she said, oh, because older people want to be called by Negro or colored. And I said, you know what? That's a bunch of garbage, because older people are dying out. You're talking about, now we're in the 2000s, and y'all put Negro and colored back on the census forms. And these people that you claim are more comfortable with those terms will be dead. So why would you put those terms for people who are not knowledgeable and want to fill out census forms? Why would you put that back on there? And I said, my fight is not with you, because you don't know any better. You're just doing your job. But my fight is with the people who actually put out the census form. And I literally wrote a letter in reference to them changing it on the census and also trying to identify us back to old terms. And I said, what would be more appropriate if you put Asiatics on there, origins or nationalities on there. Even if you wanted to put tribes on there, but you do not go back to trying to call people Negro or and see Negro or people of color or color people. And this is why what's going on right now with Trump is exactly why what's going on right now is systematic, because he's trying to take us back to the time when we were all, to America, to them were great, when they had our foot on our necks and we were serving them. So now our people have waken up, and they call the so-called woke people, have waken up and intelligent beings who know more than them and are thriving societal wise, and they're trying to take you back to when they were most comfortable, because now they're uncomfortable with who we are and what we've accomplished. So now they want to make you uncomfortable again. And so we have to be really careful with labels and colors. And this is why I'm bringing this to your attention today, because I need to really ask you all, do you all know the difference between labels and identification? Because if you do not, this is why I'm breaking it down to you today. We identify as Asians, we identify as Moors, we identify as being human. We are not labels, and people cannot keep changing you as they desire to. And remember, the prophet let us know that no one can change your decent nature. No one, unless their powers extend beyond the great universal creator. That's the power. So you can do your own label switching. If you want to call yourself one thing here and one thing there, but for another individual to label switch you, you should not allow that. And no one should be labeling you or naming you but you. Okay? Or people in your tribe, or someone who identifies and knows who you are. Allowing a European to constantly label us and change us is what causes all this confusion that we are having today. And we need to make sure that we can see, according to the name, it was what is in a name, Negro versus Afro-American versus Black. And this is the title of this particular subject that I'm talking about from this particular article. And you can see how long the battle has been on about what should we call ourselves. And we have to make sure that we make people understand who we are. So if you're a more that's conscious of who you are, you need to spread the word. And so we won't continue to have the same fight. We need to redo another article on what is in a name. Okay? And I'll be glad to do it. And then get the Negro versus Afro-American versus Black versus Asiatic. You know, what we should be calling ourselves by origin. Yes, we know we all have a nationality, but we also have an origin. Okay. All right. And so to answer these questions and relate them to when bubbling controversy, one must go back 400 years. For Americans of African descent, having been argued about the names ever since we were forcibly transported, these Europeans who were arbitrarily branding us blackamoors, niggers, and Negroes. The English word Negro is derived from the Spanish Portuguese word Negro, Negra, which means black. Means the same thing. The Portuguese and Spanish, who were pioneers in the African slave trade, used this adjective to designate the African man and woman whom they captured and transported them to slave markets to the New World. Within a short time, the Portuguese word negra, negro, with no capital letter on it, became the English now adjective nigger or negro. This word was not capitalized at first, fused not only humanity, nationality, and place of origin, but also certain European judgment about the inherited and irredeemable inferiority of the individuals so designated to the word. Also referred to certain terms as Jim Crow places, the Negro pew, and in Christian churches. I'm going to share this with you all. The reaction of the first Americans of African descent of the word Negro has never been adequately studied, but it appears from an examination of surviving documents that literature Asiatic people resisted the word with cunning and tenacity. The first Asiatic immigrants seem to have preferred the word African in surviving documents. They refer to themselves as Asiatics and Africans, and the first institutions organized by the Americans of African descent were designated. The first institutions organized by Americans of African descent were designated African via the Free African Society, the African Methodist Episcopal Church, the African Baptist Church, the Preamble of Free African Society, which was founded in Philadelphia in 1787. We, the free Africans and their descendants of the city of Philadelphia in the state of Pennsylvania or elsewhere. And again, so you can see that the word African was even being used back then. So again, what happened that we changed to being Black? Even if African is not our true identity, it associated us with a landmass, and the word Black was not being used. What happened to all the organizations that were referring to as Africans back then? What happened to them? That now they became Black organization or colored organizations or the National Association for the Advancement of Negro or the Advancement of Color People. I still am so disturbed by that. Why haven't we fixed that or changed that to African people if they wanted to, or African American? I'm just showing you how systematically trying to keep you Black and into the inferiority that I spoke about earlier in the broadcast is what's done to keep you from identifying with yourself in any way and keeping us from identifying with our brothers and sisters over the other portion, because our brothers and sisters over there, they come over here knowing that they're African descent of whatever nation in Africa, but they come over here because they're told that we do not like them or associate ourselves with them. I spoke to a lot of them, especially nurses that worked under me. I had a very hard time with a lot of the African men nurses that their thought and mentality about American women and Americans and all of that is what is brainwashing, is indoctrination, taken away from the connection that we should be making with our brothers and sisters. And look, right now, we need that connection, because what's going on over here, we need the support of our brothers and sisters to keep us grounded. We need to make sure that we're stopping identifying with these labels and start identifying with who we are. So I want to get a little bit more of this in, this reading in, because it's so important. And I remember this is 1967. We're talking about on Explosion, the whole fight about not being Black or a Negro. It's amazing that people think that this is just a fight of today. Our people have been fighting against these terms for years and years, but it's not being told. This document, where are you going to find this information from this document? Because they do not allow you to teach his history in the public schools. And certainly now in the public schools, a lot of more just like, oh, I'm glad they took that Negro teaching out of public schools and that African American teaching out of public schools, so I can put my children back in the public schools. So are you crazy? So they got European history in school, but you don't want no Asiatic history, because listen, they didn't change the African American history or the Black history to Moorish history. They eliminated you totally out of history, just like they did back on the time when I was in school. It was called American World History, and you were no part of it. In our American World History books, if you get some old books, there was a small section about the Moors. That was it, and it was about them being cast out of Spain. And all the videos that they showed us of Africa were all people wearing, grass skirts and bones in their noses with spears, hair, looking all, I don't know what the hair back then looked like. Kind of, to me, I appreciate it now because I'm older, but back then, who wanted to look like that? Run around naked like savages. Those are the videos that they showed us in school. Now, because I had a conscious family on one side of my family, I was very fortunate to be able to ignore all those things. So when I call and talk to my grandmother about it, or, talk to my father about it, I had somebody who was there to support me on those type issues. And I was like, what part of Africa is these people at? I wanted to know. And so that is exactly what they gave us in school. And I don't know, some of you are as old as I am, but that's the vision that they gave us in school. So for you to try to act like you want your children in those school because they took the African American history out or the Black history out of the school is ridiculous, because now the only history your children get to find out is a European history, and making them look like they gods and goddesses when they are not. They're far from it. That's what it makes them look like. So you sound totally ridiculous. And my question to a lot of Moors is this: you don't want to talk about the civil rights movement because y'all claim they all agents. And we know that's a lie. I'm a Moor, and I know that's a lie. No, everybody was not agents that worked for the Civil War. And the civil rights movement. And not only that, they fought for our right to vote, which the prophet talks about in our literature, right? So all these people that died to fight for us to be able to ride on the bus, which you as Moors now can ride on the bus because of it, to be able to teach our children, because that's what they fought for, to teach our children, to be able to give us the right to vote, which we should be partaking in the right to vote. All of these things people fought for, and you want to call them agencies and act like they did not exist, and these people died with the conscience that they had, with the knowledge that they knew. That's what they knew. Okay, they knew back then, so they fought for what they thought they knew, but they fought for your benefit. And now you're trying to say to erase all of these people out of history, because when you look for history of the Moors, where is it? A few Moors. Here at our school, we have history of the Moors because I make sure the children learn about us and other Asiatics. But out there in that public school system, they are not going to get that information. So stop talking foolish. All those people that die and fought for you to be able to say who you are. And you have to acknowledge that and stop trying to act like other people don't exist. Before you became Moorish, before you knew who you were, who were you, representing back then? What are you talking about? So anyway, I had to get that out because some people really sound ridiculous when they act like other Asiatics did not exist. And every Asiatic that fought for the civil rights movement was an agent. That's the most ridiculous thing I ever heard. The most ridiculous. People fought for freedom because they wanted their life back outside of slavery. And that's what they were fighting for. And that needs to be honored and acknowledged, regardless if they call. Listen, some of you all that say you Moorish, and I just have to keep it real, this is real Moorish talk, still carrying Negro names, still carrying colored names. So if you tell me your name is Hannibal Akbar Ill, and I'm looking for you, I can't find you because your name is still Henry John Bristow or whatever, because you have not gotten rid of the Negroism. So stop acting like you're so on high. And I know for a fact when people pass away, I've asked to do funerals, and I'm looking for the Moorish name, the Asiatic name that you associate with. Your parents or family members don't even have you down as that name. On that obituary they got you down is still some Negro. When the prophet said, give all that back. So you all got to get it together and stop using talking about that's public and private. It is a private, and your free national name should also be public. There's no such thing as private and public. You're supposed to use your free national name for everything. So change the name or correct your status and stop playing games because you're dying as a Negro. I had to fight the funeral home to make sure they put Asiatic on my father's death certificate. And I know the BJL made sure they put Moorish on her husband's death certificate. So if you want to put Asiatic or Moorish, stop dying a Negro, proclaiming that you live in a Moorish life and dying as a Negro. All right, so that's why these things that I'm talking about is important, because you have to 100% claim back who you are. That's how you get the power back. Talking about fight the power, you get back who you are. Stop living under secrecy, under Negroism. That's what you're doing. And so when I'm talking to you, I'm Akbar John Ill, and then in the and then in your private world or whatever, or your public name is John Smith Jones or whatever. It's ridiculous. You should not have a different name or appellation. Correct your status. And I know some of you all sent in paperwork and we're correcting your status now, and the documentation is finished and we got it all done. And so we'll be doing those mailing outs. And some of you all, we have to go by first come, first serve, because we have a lot of people who need to fix their documentation, who nationalized under another organization. They did not know what they was doing and messed up paperwork and names. You got identification cards that you all send me that don't have feathers or turbans on your head. Ridiculous. Any old individual could say, I'm Akbar John, or Akbar Hassin, or whatever, Il Bay or Bay Il or Ali or Il or Bay. Any of you all can say all that and don't have a national headdress on. It's called a nationality card for a reason. It identifies you with a nation. Okay, you can get an ID card anywhere. You can get it from around the corner somewhere if you want to get a card without your fez or turban on. Stop claiming to be Moorish and not identifying as Moorish in your public setting. In your public setting, but in your private setting, you want me to be claiming you as a Moor when you do not identify yourself as Moors, and neither does your family know that you Moor. Your family has no idea of who you are. So then I'm looking confused. I'm confused. Or they'll say, oh, we didn't call him that or call her that. We didn't know her by that or him by that. So now I'm standing up there, supposed to be doing a service for you, and they want me to use a slave term. And so a lot of times I turn it down because I'm not going to put you, away as a slave if you lived a life as a Moor. But you have to get your paperwork straight. You have to make sure that before you pass away, that your will is straight, your documentation is straight, all of that straight. That's what this battle is right here. People did not want to be Negro and Black back here. So you have to give them much honor that they fought in the 1960s to be Africans, because they did not know that they were Moors at this time. Some of us still didn't know. So they wanted to identify with something more than being Black. And African and Black do not mean the same thing. Kush and Black does not mean the same thing. Nubia or Nubian and Black does not mean the same thing. Stop misclassifying yourself. It does not mean the same thing. All right? It just does not. All right. So let me move on. It's just I'm very passionate about this more. I'm very passionate about the movement. I'm very passionate about who we are. And I'm very passionate about being labeled. I do not allow anyone to label me. Anyone. I will straighten you up in a heartbeat. Even when people are talking about children and they say, well, how many kids do you have? I said, I do not have any kids, but I have 3 children, 4 children, whatever. That's what I'll tell them about the number of children. How many grandkids do you have? I do not have grandkids. I have grandchildren. And I will name the amount of grandchildren that I have. So I do not allow people to put me in a category of negativity or switch me by conversation or sake of conversation. I just do not. And if in your life you start doing this and start allowing people to label you and your children and your family and your descendants and start standing up like these people did in the 1960s, and started changing the name of their organizations from Black or to whatever to African, that was fine for them to do that back then because that's what they knew. Because listen, I learned from my uncle that a graduation of some sort is better than none at all. And he taught me that because I was complaining when Roots came on. I just really hate, I should say dislike, but when we as a people give our children these free names like Rashida and Hassan and Gamal and Jamal, and then they still got last names like Williams, Jones, and Smith. And so I said that to my uncle one time. We were having a conversation. I really missed the flesh my uncle in that voice of his. But anyway, he said, look at it like this. We will get there eventually. But after Roots, people started changing the names of their children from these colonial first names. not realizing how important that the last name is the one that identifies you still to slavery. A lot of them do not recognize that if Smith had your family, that's who you are, Smith. If Jones had your family, and listen, your labels changed. Your labels changed. So say if my family was with the Smith plantation, and the Smith plantation wanted to get rid of my family, they said, we're going to get rid of that gal because she too radical, she too pro-Asiatic or whatever. We're going to get rid of her, and we're going to move her over to the Williams plantation. Now my name became Williams instead of Smith. So now I still have no association with that. Or say the Williams said, now we're going to transfer over. She's aging now. And we're going to give her to one of the plantations, the Jones plantation, because the Jones plantation takes the elderly and they use them for whatever they do. So now I'm at the Jones plantation. So now I've gone to Smith, Williams to Jones. All those labels. Okay, all those labels. And so none of them identify with me. It's no identity, it's labels. And so now your family, so you're so proud of that last name that you were with. So now you were with the Jones. So my name is Hakeem Jones, and you're still carrying on the Jones plantation stigma on you. And then you'll say, oh, the prophet said to hold on to those names because that gives you the land back. Well, Jones owned the land, which was a plantation owner, and slaves can never own property. So what land are you talking about still holding on to the word Jones or the label Jones? What are you holding on to? And so sometimes in conversation, we have to think about what we're saying. And a lot of times we do not think about what we're saying. Or we try to take away from those who came before us and fought for our rights because they didn't know that they were Moors or their last names were not Bey, Ali, or Ill. And so now we want to beat them down. When they fought for things like back in the 1960s about not being Black. So, Moors, we have to come up with a better solution and connection to our people and, get rid of the label switching and calling ourselves labels. And identification is important. Identification leads to culture, identity, respect, and heritage. And as long as you do not let those Europeans label you, they have to respect you. I do not have any problems with any Europeans respecting me because I do not allow them to label me. But as long as you, for the sake of conversation, for the sake of this, I just let it go because of this, I'm never letting it go. In a courtroom or anything, when they call me, sovereign citizen in the courtroom, I stop and dead in the track. I'm not a sovereign citizen. I'm a national. They try to make like we adopted the sovereign system. No, I'm not sovereign citizen. I'm not that. I'm a sovereign nation, but I am a national. And so just things we have to stop them dead in their tracks with. And if more of us did the fight like that, we would be so much further today. And listen, we have to move forward. We have to. We cannot stay stuck in the past. And this is why I admire this article so much, because I found people fighting for the right to have identity back then, even though it was Africa. They didn't list what nations, but they knew that they were not Black because it was a label that did not make sense. They knew that they were not colored because it was a label that didn't make sense. They knew that they were not people of color or colored people because it did not make sense. What happened to that fight back then? What happened to it? All right. So, as I was saying, and the color community reacted by abandoning the word African in favor of the words colored and or free persons of color. In 1835, the fifth annual convention of the Colored People of America passed a resolution which recommended as far as possible to our people to abandon use of the word color when either speaking or writing concerning themselves, and especially to remove the title of African from their institutions and the marbles of churches and etc. Philadelphia leaders later recommended use of the term oppressed Americans. Why would they want to fight against the word African and be oppressed Americans? What kind of title is that? Another label. This advice was scorned by militant colored leaders, oppressed Americans, snorted Samuel Cornish. Who are they? Nonsense, brethren. You are colored Americans, the Indians are red Americans, and the white people are European Americans, and you are as good as they, and they are no better than you. So this was back during that time, and this was a Samuel Cornish is the one who came up with that. The oppressed Americans were routed by the colored Americans, and the term color became the dominant word in the colored community for the rest of the 19th century. So they told them to get rid of African and take on color. What is that telling you? The mindset of the people. They didn't want to be identified with who they are, so they felt color was a better term to use. And that's why I said, what happened to it? All right. There were, to be sure, descendants. Frederick Douglass, the leading colored public figure, used the word Negro occasionally, and some eccentrics experimented with the terms like Anglo-African for the reasons that were probably connected with the tendency of the free people of color to withdraw from the great masses of freedmen. There was a sharp reaction to the word colored in the Civil War and Reconstruction periods. For a short spell, the term Negro occupied roughly the same place in Negro life as the words Asiatic and Afro-American occupy today. In other words, it was a term of militancy, self-consciousness, used by Asiatic men defiantly asserting their pride to race. We are told, for example, that Blanche Kessel Bruce, the first Asiatic man to serve a full term in the U.S. Senate, refused to use the word colored, saying, I am a Negro and proud of my race. Not knowing. So he refused to use the word colored, and he wanted to use the word Negro, not realizing that it meant the same thing as black. He was the one. Bruce's example was not followed by all Reconstruction leaders. In the North Carolina Constitutional Convention of 1888, James Walker Hood, one of the 15 Asiatic delegates, denied that there was a Negro on the floor of the convention. Outraged and insulted, he insisted that the word Negro had no significance to color, but could only be used as a reproachable of degrading sense, and further declared that no man on the floor knew where the term originated, since it was not founded in ancient history. Nowhere the word Negro is in ancient history. Inspired or profane. In the South Carolina Constitution Convention of that year, T.J. Colligan, a radical European Southerner, offered a resolution which urged that steps be taken to expunge forever from the vocabulary of South Carolina the epithets nigger, Negro, and Yankee, and to punish this insult by fine and imprisonment. So it was a European that even told them that this was a degrading word to use and wanted it expunged off the records and not even being used. So that goes to show you again, this is history, this is legacy, this is information that no one is teaching or telling us about how these labels. So remember earlier, I was telling you that they said, and they were like, they wanted to use the word African, which would have been a better term. I don't think it's a worse term. I think it's a better term because there's many nations in Africa, so you can identify with that. But with these words, black and colored and Negro, there's no association to the human race. And we know by classification, black is, as I told you earlier, is an inferiority. White is a superiority. So for them to constantly keep using the word black and Negro to us, which means the same thing, they thought colored would be better. And the term Negro, even though it's not in ancient history as a term for identification, it's an ancient word from the language, which is considered Spanish today, which is negra, which means black. Now, some people will try to say, oh, it means dark. In today's society, they want you to still be Negro. So they'll say it means dark, but it actually means black. That's exactly what it means. And so, therefore, our people are still identifying themselves with, if you call me Negro, you might as well call me black. Black, Negro is the same thing. It's not any difference in the two terms except for the language which is being used. And so people need to identify and know that. So stop being proud to be black because you're still being proud to be a Negro. Stop putting pride in a word that has nothing to do with the human family, but has everything to do with social class and status. And when you call yourself black, you're saying that you're a lower class than any other nation of people. So we have to learn to do that. Okay. All right, I'm going to look at some of the comments because I see of them in a few moments. I'm just going to finish up where I am. All right. And so, in periods of reaction and extreme stress, Asiatic people usually turn inward. They begin to redefine themselves and they begin to argue seriously about names. The post Reconstruction period, one of the Europeanist times in America history, was an archetype expression of this process. The word color still retained a commanding position in the period, but men like Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington used the word Negro freely. There were also exponents of the Afro American theme, as evidenced by the founding in 1899, the National Afro American League and the Baltimore Afro American newspaper established in 1892. Toward the end of the century, the word Negro began to supplement the words colored and Afro American. It was during this period that the first national Negro organizations, the American Negro Academy in 1897 and the National Negro Business League in 1900 were founded. The founding of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People in 1909 marked, it seems, the disappearing pink of the colored movement. By 1990, the Negro Yearbook could report there is an increasing use of the word Negro. So they went from being Africans to being Negroes and a people. The result is that the word Negro is more and more acquiring dignity that it did not have the past. During this time period, there was an aggressive campaign for capitalization of the word Negro. Because remember, I said earlier, it was a lowercase letter. Now they tried to make it a label for you, which they try to make it an identification. It was never, it's just a label. And when the New York Times, and so the campaign was led by the NAACP, peaked in 1930 when the New York Times announced that it would print the word Negro with a capital letter in the editorial March 7th, 1930. And you guys can look these up. The newspaper said, I'm in our style book, Negro is now added to the list of words to be capitalized. It is not merely a typographical change. It is an action of recognition of racial self-respect for those who have been for generations in the lower case. Although the word Negro became greatly acceptable designation in the 1930s, there was a strong opposition for the militant radicals like Adam Clayton Powell. He was definitely big on that. Who continued to use the word Afro-American, and from the militant nationalists like Elijah Muhammad, who continued to speak of the so-called Negro. This opposition, incoherent and organized, was sharpened in the 50s and 60s by the rhetoric artistic of Malcolm X, El Malik El Shabazz, and the emergence of Asiatic power movement. But El Malik El Shabazz, also known as Malcolm X, and the Asiatic power movement were reflections of a general crisis of identity, which is similar in tone and urgency to the crisis of the 19th century and the first decades of the 20th century. It appears from the short historical sketch that the word Negro has been a generally accepted term in the Asiatic and African communities, or if you prefer, the Negro community for the relatively short time. It appears also that has been continuously and sustained opposition of that term. So you see how it was pushed. And you have to ask yourself, who paid them? So now take your mind away from Africa to start up being an African and change all of those organizations from the term African to Negro. Step backward, not forward. It was backward. All right. contemporary critics of the word Negro said Booker T. Washington was primarily responsible for the campaign in which the word Negro supplemented the words of Afro American and Asiatic. There is truth in this. The Negro Yearbook and the Negro Business League were Washington projects, but it was not the whole truth. The movement for adoption of the word Negro was given a strong emphasis by militants, radicals like W.E.B. Du Bois, who was one of the founders of the American Negro Academy, and militant nationalists like Marcus Garvey, who used the word Negro consistently and named the organization of the Universal Negro Improvement Association. As a matter of fact, the classic argument in favor of the word Negro was articulated by W.E.B. Du Bois in a reply for a pro-African letter. Since this exchange, which appeared in the Crisis in March 1928, capsules the main issues of the controversy we are printing in detail. And then I have the letter, which if I have time, I'll read later, the letter that W.E.B. Du Bois wrote in reference to using the word Negro. So as you can see, that these so-called prominent leaders with these labels. Now, remember, we were identifying, and this is identifying with African, identifying with that. But then you had these so-called Negro leaders that thought they were so intelligent that they knew that the word Negro was better than the word Afro-American or African-American. And listen, even though we might say none of them are great, I have to disagree that the word African was better used back then than the words colored and Negro, because it took us a step back. Because if you say I'm African, then I can identify with what nation in Africa am I from. So it would give me some sense of intellect to trek into Africa. But then when you start giving me terms like colored and Negro, there's no association to the human family, no association to the human race. So where do I look for myself? And this is what too. So all these intellects that they try to claim that W.E.B. Du Bois was, and all of them were not. And even William Clayton Powell had good enough sense to say, listen, even though he was a Christian leader, that he was like, I'm not calling myself no Negro, because we know term Negro is a beast. If you really knew the term of the word Negro, and it is a European term from the troglodyte nigger, right, which is the caveman. That was another name for the caveman. And so all these terms came, which mean beastly and no intellect, ignorant. So that's where it came from. So it seems like these so-called intellects did not even know that back then. They didn't even know that they were calling themselves beasts back then. And we know that the word Negro, Negra, is from the Latin word or Moorish word or Portuguese, if you want to call it, that means black. Okay. So I'm going to pause for a moment and take a few of these comments. I see lots of men here, so I'm excited to read some of them. I'm so glad when you all interact. So let's take a look and see what's going on from some of these comments here. Woo, we got a lot of them here. It looks like many from the same individual. So let me see. Go all the way back. Okay, so the infamous Marty Marr. What's up, Marty Marr? I'm so glad you come and join me every week. I really appreciate you coming every week. He says, indoctrination of children accepting the name black. Absolutely. Lady Thorough, Islam, Lady Thorough. Glad to see you able to make it today. Let me see. The famous Martin Nobel Drew Ali came to my hometown in Chicago in 1925 and opened the Moorish Temple of America. Okay. All right. Praise the Lord. Supreme honor to the Holy and Divine Prophet Noble Drew Ali, born January 8th, 1886 in the state of North Carolina, founder of the 1913 Moorish American. Praise the Lord. Supreme honors. All right. Same thing. This is from Lee Bay 2334. All right. He posted that several times. 1913-80, the Moorish Science Temple of America, Divine National Movement. You are not Negroes. That's by color folks, black people, or Ethiopians. But he never said you're not African. So that's a really important point. He said names were given to slaves by slaveholders. That's right. We know that. 1913, the Old Canine Temple in Newark, New Jersey, National Divine Creed, Islam, Shrine. This is all by Lee, 2334. Let's see, it says, and Central Land Deed, Cook County Recorder's Office, Deeds Book 521, page 579, 1010 5905, Cook County, Illinois. Yes. All right. 14th Amendment, non-federal identification documents, 1857. Dred Scott, slave name. The Social Security number, Social Security cards is the 1857 Dred Scott slave. Okay. All right. So he posted that several times. In the political affairs of denationalization, Moorish branded black, so-called Negroes, so-called African Americans in America, the Social Security number. Okay. All right. Home, residential, and storage shops, businesses, companies, brand, facilities, factory, merchant, manufacturer, supply chains, workplace, employment, the economic house, car, job. Not sure what that means. Gonna have to explain that more to me. Nationality, civilization, citizens of state, corporation, courthouse, bank house, tribunal. All right, nationality in the real estate market. Let's see. Moorish American Muslims at Central Land. Okay, 1930, the NOI, 1954 to 1968, Negro Civil Rights Movement, 14 years, Black People Power Lives Matter. Okay, I'm not sure if you're giving us some kind of history. True Americans, they believe in their black a slave property. All right, study typing some of the same things. All right, so let's go to Ed by Goods and Ford T, 8356. I love you, my good elder sister. You saying in a nutshell that where you do anything on those Albion's documents, you tell me who are you out the gate that's stopping their tracks and shut them down. Absolutely. Nationality is our birthright. That's the famous Marty Marr. That's right. It is our birthright. All right. By Goods and 4T8356 again. They better not misclassify me or I will do suits so fast you will see what I mean. Okay. Somebody Lee 2334. Black has three different meanings. Connotation black, belief, etymology, denotation black pale, law black, civil litter mortus. Well, black has all of those meanings because it represents death. So it's all death. It's all dead. Okay. All right. So let's see. By Goods and 40, I know that Sabir in his channel talk on that word black, that you cannot ever be so-called black and need to call thyself more. Okay. All right. Yes. And I'm sure that a lot of Moors are talking about it on their channels. And the biggest thing with the word black is you can look it up in a dictionary and it never means anything that's positive. And this is why even the black a Moor, when they do the black a Moor, that is because Moors back in that time, their dark complexion, they called them black and Moors though, because they wanted them to be less societal. It had nothing to do with their dark complexion. People say, oh, because they were very dark olive. No, society wise. And remember, the word black is a brand new word. We are ancient people. And so we don't need to take on all these labels, these brand new labels. We need to identify exactly who we are. And I'm telling you, if we continue to identify of who we are, continue to identify that, then people will have no choice but to. So it's like when you correct your status, when you write your name, say your name was Joy Johnson, I don't know, and you decided that now you want to be Imani Bay, okay? So now you no longer sign Joy Johnson. You sign everything Imani Bay, Imani Bay, Imani Bay. No matter what, eventually they're going to start writing that. And proof. Sister, I was told she passed away. Our defense minister who passed away the year prior, I think was it this year? No, it was the year prior in June. I think his family told me July, somewhere around there. Anyway, it was a sister that he introduced me to. And her son, I did his paperwork for the court, just make a long story short. And he corrected his name in the court. Even the so-called judge, the man, the magistrate behind the road, identified him for his free national name. Not disrespecting him, because when he went in that courtroom and he was a young Mo, he went in there and he explained that this is who I am. This is my paperwork, and to identify me other than anything else, I'm not going to answer to it. And so what I'm saying is that we as a people have to stop allowing us to call us anything that they want to. They will never want to recognize you, because as you can see, we didn't want to recognize ourselves from what I'm reading, because W.E.B. Du Bois and others did not want to be Africans. And he was married to a European, so I don't have a whole lot for W.E.B. Du Bois anyway. But, in his letter, it's a whole long letter, and I'm not going to waste all of my time reading that. Some of you all may be familiar with the letter that he wrote in defense of the word Negro. So when I'm saying, a lot of times historically, when we're talking to our children, especially when I'm teaching the children about any of these leaders, that the ones that were sellouts, that married Europeans and stuff, I let them know that this is because remember, they're choosing our leaders. They're telling us who we should honor. They picking and choosing your leaders for you and who they want you to honor. And that is totally ridiculous. How are you going to pick and choose who I honor? You're going to tell me who I can and cannot honor. And then you want to give a day to some of them of celebration of who you allow me to honor, thinking that you did something big for us. That is not the case. So for us, like coming up on Tuesday, May 19th, our school is off. We don't have school on May 19th. El Malik El Shabaz's born day, we don't have school. As a matter of fact, I do everything I can to honor him and let everybody know who he is. Because the battle that he fought is my battle. The ballot and the bullet. I mean, he talked about things. He even corrected himself when he thought that we should not vote. When he found out that we should vote, guess what? He corrected it and let the people know I was wrong. When I was young, I had some of the same ideals. Oh, well, we shouldn't vote. And then my uncle had to sit me down and listen. The Prophet Noble Drew told us we should vote, and this is why. See, we need people to sit down and explain to us. Stop going around here talking about you don't. Listen, I'm going to say this to you all in the most honorable way I can. If voting did not count for us to vote, and it did not count, why are they trying to take away our right to vote? You have to ask yourself that question. If voting means nothing, they wouldn't have to take it away from us or keep changing the Voting Rights Act. Why would they keep doing it? Why would they take it away from us? They're taking it away because your vote does matter. Your right to vote does matter. The prophet said that we can cast an equal ballot at the voting polls. Because, listen, we cannot get things done in our society if we do not have the right people in office. So we can write all the letters we want. We can claim to be Moorish all we want. We can fight for our rights all we want. But as you can see right now, what's happening with the Supreme Court. If we do not have the right people in office to fight the battle for us, then what else are we going to do? And right now, for us as Asiatics, as Moors, as conscious and unconscious, we need to come together and do for ourselves, because they're trying to make it where we have no rights to do anything. They're trying to make it before the time of slavery, when they were comfortable telling us what to do. That's the time frame that we're in. They want to take it back. All the progression that has been made over the years. Because remember, the black codes have never been abolished. They've never taken away the black codes. So the black codes, the Christian black codes, are still in existence. There's nowhere historically that you can show me where they ever removed the black Christian codes, ever. So therefore, they're trying to reestablish that. So not more than ever. And I remember when I first started this broadcast, I put out to Asiatic leaders, and they probably, none of them probably watched this. That's probably why they haven't, got back with me. Let's get together and try to make some differences. Try to change things for our betterment. Because if we do not, the road is not looking good for us ahead. We can claim all we want about who we are, but if we're not putting the work in to the proclamation, then where are we going from there? I'm willing to do the work. As old as I am still willing to do the work. But we need you all to want to do the work too. Stop letting people label us. Stop letting them put labels on us. Real quickly, it says, let me just read some of them. Okay. Legacy vibration. The Somalians is great example. Okay. By good and for T 8356. So was Trump made to be the king as of yet? Oh, he wants to be a king so bad. He wants to be a king. Let's see. All right. Let's see. We have Lee Bay 2034 Free White Persons Act. The legal, let's say the legal Siegel Free White Person Act does not mean the Caucasian. Yes, and we've gone over that. We know that that doesn't mean what we're talking about today is status here. We're talking about how important, because the name of this article was called What is in a Name? And I was talking about, and this fit right into today's topic about labels. I wanted you all to see how at one time we were making progress. We were coming out of making ourselves those names to identifying with Africa, to even calling ourselves Africans and reassociating ourselves with that land they call the motherland. We were trying. But then all of a sudden, we had the so-called Negro leaders that said, oh no, I want to be called a Negro, and tried to put some pride in it. And then all of a sudden, like that, newspapers changed, companies changed, all these things changed with the NAACP, and now we're a Negro association or a Negro organization. A Negro, after graduating from being called these things, backslid right into being called a Negro again. And that shows you how easily labels can be put on you again and again. And we start recycling these labels over and over and over again. Okay, and we have to stop that. Do not allow yourself to be labeled, or anyone in your family. And listen, for anyone who may be watching this broadcast, take heed to what I'm saying. And you can go to Real Moorish Talk at yahoo.com and leave me a message or a letter if you're not sure how to identify yourself. The one thing we do not want to do is fall backward. And it looks like some of us are falling backward. There's more. It looks like some of us are just going backward and backward and backward. We do not want to move forward. We're steadily going backward, and there's no time to go backward. All right, let's see. It says, Lee Bay 2334, world governments have national decent names, the national names of nations, states, countries. the nationality of a nation, state, country. I'm not sure what this word says. Behemoth consortiums, that's the Latin word, geopolitical geography. By good and of 1480-56, the Galactic Asiatic Wars got this all on lock and watching all. All right, and so the good thing about this, and I wanted, like I said, maybe next week I'll actually go over the letter, but I want to finish up some of this. So W. Du Bois argue is a usual persuasive, but the eyes of the pro-Asiatic and African community is hardly conclusive. Critics of the famous exchange said W.B. Du Bois, uh, for example, he started out with the correct premise that names objectively are unimportant. In other words, there is no necessary connection between the name and the thing from this premise, which is objectively true. He draws a very different conclusion that names are unimportant to people. Now, I'm not sure where he get that from because he was proud of that name his mother gave him, that long name that he signed it on everything. So when he started talking about names were not important, see how people pick and choose? When it came to labeling us, he didn't think that was important, but yet he wanted to be a Negro. So see, controversial. You wanted to be W.B. Du Bois, you wanted to be a Negro, and you didn't want to be an African, but you're saying names are not important. Contradictory. Keith Bird, the coordinator of the Afro-American History and Culture Center of New York City, of New York City, of New York City and of education and other opponents of the word Negro, pointed out that modern linguistics scholarship is virtually ununanimous in finding that names were determined, that we largely see what we feel. They're also critical of the board's assertion that the wide use of the word Negro for an eloquent, conclusive, critics say that W.B. Du Bois he invaded this issue, so he didn't want to talk about it. Nobody doubts that the things are important, at least of certain levels. But the whole point of racism is in America and the determination to deny human status to certain people. Millionaires as well as world famous scholars like Du Bois, who have one thing but a lack of certain. Du Bois was too honest and too brilliant to be content with eloquent but invasive. In 1928 statement, as the late of the 1958, he was still wrestling with the issue of terminology. Moreover, his words, the souls of Asiatic folk, the gifts of Asiatic folk, then and now, Reconstruction testify ambivalence about the word Negro, ambivalent about the word Negro. So he was confused towards the end about the word Negro, but he certainly tried to push it. So I just have a few minutes left, so I want to go over a few things. Again, our email is realmorsetalk@yahoo.com. You can support our online schooling by donate $online schooling MC, our humanitarian organization, Daughters of Drew Ali, $Daughters of Drew Ali. And you can purchase books at circle7publishing.com. And look, Morris, I put this up every single week. And you all need to start donating and start purchasing to support our school. Again, donate button. If you don't have Cash App, you can go ahead to donate at Moorish Science with gsk@durriyyah.com. Again, purchase our books at circle7publishing.com. Our humanitarian organization, $Daughters of Drew Ali.com. And also donate to our $online schooling for Moorish children, MC. Listen, Morris, it's been my absolute pleasure to be with you all today. I had so much information. I didn't get all of it in, but I tried to get in as much as I can. All right. And so I trust you all wrote down information if you have questions. But remember, we are not labels. We need things that identify us to the human race. And we have to stop doing labels, but stick to identification. Until next week, Morris, take care of yourselves and each other. You have been on Real Moorish Talk with me, Prime Minister National Grand Sheikh Durriyyah Bay.